Good evening. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Todd Crane. I'm a principal scientist at the International Livestock Research Institute, and I'm very happy to welcome you to this session on investing in the future of sustainable livestock systems, stimulating action and impact. This session is co-sponsored with IICA, the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture. Livestock have a multifaceted place in the climate change discussions, of course. As centers of livelihoods, nutrition, and economy, adaptation is an important priority. However, as greenhouse gas emitters, greenhouse gas emission sources, livestock systems also require attention to reduce their environmental impacts. This session today outlines progress in sustainable livestock systems in the Americas with IICA and collaborators, and we'll then go on to outline some exciting ambitions for channeling finance into sustainable and climate-smart livestock solutions in Africa. I'd now like to pass the microphone to Lloyd Day, who's the Deputy Director General of IICA, for a few opening words before we move to the first part of the panel.
Well, thanks, Todd, and good evening, everyone. I've seen a lot of you guys for the past couple days, so I won't say too much. It's a pleasure to be partnering with ILRI, Todd. ILRI is a great partner of ours. The whole CGIAR system is important. ECO was founded in 1942 as the Inter-American Institute for Science and Agriculture. So our connection to ILRI and the whole CGIAR system and science is very important. Livestock is vital to the Americas. From Canada in the north to Argentina in the south, we grow livestock. And we grow the feed for livestock. So it's going to be really important to talk about livestock, as you just said, as a source of nutrients, but also a source of part of the solution to climate change. And we need to discuss that. We need to hear some examples from our guest speakers here. And with that, I'm going to stop. It's the end of the day. Everyone's a little bit tired. We're just rushing over from the trade house and greenhouse. You got here before I did. You're fast. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. For the first part of this panel, I'd like to welcome up four panelists. First, Dr. Troy Rowan, who is an assistant professor at the University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture. Marilyn Hershey, chair of the Dairy Management Incorporated and a dairy farmer herself. Katie Cole, the vice president of livestock sustainability at Elanco Animal Health. And unfortunately, Dr. Ibrahim Mohammed is not able to join us today, so we have Lloyd Day representing for the IICA. First up is Troy Rowan speaking on the methane hoofprint and productivity of livestock in the Americas, examining key progress and challenges.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. So I'll give just a little bit of background on myself first. The first thing's a disclaimer, and that's that I'm a geneticist by training. I've spent all of my relatively short academic career thinking about various traits in cattle and how we can use genetics to improve them, making them more efficient, sustainable, healthy, all the things that we're interested in as livestock producers and members of allied industry. But I've sort of fallen into this methane thing a little bit in recent years, and in trying to understand that not just as a concern for us as a livestock community, but also as a trait that we might be able to make genetic progress on. So a big part of my research program focuses on strategies to understand sort of grazing cow efficiency, something that's not a unique challenge to us in North America, but also in South America, and even some emerging collaborations with some of your colleagues at ILRI, trying to understand what makes cows efficient in these forage-based systems where they're really designed to operate, right? Cows have co-evolved with our grasslands for thousands and thousands of years, and since domestication, we've been making selection and management decisions to help make those cows better stewards of our land as we try and maximize those resources while again being good stewards of them at the same time. But methane, of course, has creeped into this conversation and has become a bigger and bigger part of what we do in the research world. Geneticists microbiologists I work a fair bit with, right? Trying to understand that interface between the animal's rumen environment, her methane emission, and again, how those can work together to effectively turn that food into high quality protein. And so I guess the status of things in North America is a still substantial but relatively small methane and carbon footprint. So our intensity, so the kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of carcass weight is about half what it is in the global south, right? So when we look to African production systems that are maybe they lack a little bit of the management intensity, but still a lot of room that we can make up, both in direct interventions, and Katie will talk a little bit more about feed additives, some of the expanding work there, but more and more sources of hope, I guess, coming online from methane vaccines on the horizon to just basic grazing management practices, trying to maximize the digestibility, palatability of feeds that will produce the least amount of methane. And of course, our interest as geneticists is making this a trait that we're able to move the needle on from a genetic selection perspective. A little bit of background on that, I guess, while I'm thinking about it. It turns out that it's a moderately heritable trait for us in both beef and dairy cattle, somewhere around the 0.25 heritability. So 25% of that trait is going to stem from an animal's genetics, which to me is really, really encouraging. Most of our productivity traits, whether it's milk yield or weaning weight, the trait that we think about the most in my part of the United States, a similar amount of genetic control over methane emission is a trait. So certainly something that we can build into our selection objectives as we breed these cattle, but something that we can't overlook all of the pieces of productivity that we can't let slip when we integrate new traits into our selection objectives, whether we're beef or dairy farmers. So again, still a lot of opportunities, even in the Americas, to close the productivity gap. There's still a lot of meat left on the bone. We haven't completely optimized these production systems. We're still about twice the emission intensity that beef produced in Western Europe is, right? So whether those are feed and grazing strategies, whether those are continued progress in genetics, doing more crossbreeding, right? This is something that we've known about for decades and decades in the beef industry, but only about 50% of our commercial producers do it. So again, I think a lot of the challenges from both a productivity standpoint and thinking about methane is something that we want to move the needle on. We share a lot more of similarities than we have differences when we look from the Americas over to our friends in the global south. So with that, I'll maybe let Marilyn go next. Yeah.
So sure, thanks. Marilyn Hershey on livestock production's role in farmer livelihoods, poverty reduction, and sustainable development.
Thank you, and it's great to be here. You know, in 2008, U.S. did a life cycle assessment and showed that dairy accounted for 2% of the greenhouse gases in the U.S. And knowing that we have a tremendous opportunity. You know, we've made reductions in the last number of years, but knowing that there are still opportunities to make. And, you know, it's something Dwayne and I, when we look at our dairy farm every year, we will ask ourselves, what is it we can do next year that is better than we did this year? And it's really something that every farmer will ask themselves, knowing that there are solutions out there that farmers have to be able to help the environment. And you know, I think back of my father, who you know, we're 40 minutes north of the Chesapeake Bay. I'll start off with, but which is a very large watershed in the United States. But you know, thanks to science and research, my father was making conservation decisions decades ago, and that was long before we were even talking about climate change. But it was something that decisions he was making on the farm to improve the soil health and the soil quality and improve the water quality of the Chesapeake Bay. And that's really, when we think about what we're doing in dairy farming in the United States, that's really what we're focusing on. We're focusing on methane reductions. We're focusing on water quality. We're focusing on water quantity. And we have a very diverse industry in the United States. The issues that we have in the East Coast of the country, the issues that Dwayne and I face, are very different issues than what they're facing in the West. And then you have the climate issues of weather conditions. We just went through a drought in Pennsylvania, in the Northeast. We just went through a drought that it's been the driest it was since 1831. That's a long stretch of time. And, you know, our winter crop will not grow like it should, so our wheat harvest will be, the forage won't be the same quality that it should be, knowing that in the South, they have gone through some very horrific hurricane issues. So we know that there's problems with climate, but what can we do? We also know that we have solutions on our farms, and we have multiple tools. So feed additives is one, and Dwayne and I are looking at that. We're going to start feeding that shortly, so we're excited about that opportunity and seeing what that does. You mentioned genetics, Troy, and genetics really something when we look at where our dairy cow has come in the last 10 years. Much more efficient, both milk production, butterfat, and protein, and how that is just going to continue to improve. Soil, I mentioned soil and the improvements that we can make in our quality soil, knowing that a healthy soil is going to help the environment. And we have organic nutrients to put on that soil from our animals that really help to grow. You know, I mentioned we had a drought, and I mentioned the forage that we had planted. The fields that Dwayne had put sufficient nutrients on prior to planting, those fields look better. Even going through a drought, they had moisture in the soil that that wasn't there in the other fields that got planted before. You know, they probably ran out of time, or, you know, there's always a time crunch to get that field planted. So I'm sure that's what it was. But, you know, you just want to make sure that the proper nutrients are there, and we have that available. I'll close with, in 2017, Dwayne and I put in a methane digester, knowing that this is not a tool that every farm across the country will use, but it's something that Dwayne and I have been able to utilize. The methane captured from the cow's manure is converted to electricity. Being so close to consumers and so close to Washington, D.C., and New York City and Philadelphia, we're able to also incorporate a lot of food waste through that digester and get the methane from the food waste and convert that to electricity. We can run enough for our farm, and then also have enough to put back onto the grid for the family. You know, one thing farmers love to talk about is sustainability, but not in you know, sustainability as we're talking this week, as much as sustainability to pass the farm on to the next generation. And so that's something that farmers are constantly thinking about. How can I have a profitable business to be able to pass this on to the next generation? And we're excited. Our daughter Casey has just decided she's do a career change. She's been teaching school for a number of years, and she's decided to stop teaching school and come back and work on the farm. And she's going to make ice cream. So we're excited about that venture as well.
Thanks so much, Marilyn. Now Katie Cook on innovation technology, the case of Bovaer in America.
Great, thank you. Well, first I'll start just with a brief introduction of Elanco for those who may not know what Elanco is. Elanco is an animal health company that's been around for about 70 years, and we've focused on bringing different solutions and tools to our farmers and ranchers across the world. We're in about over 100 countries that focus first on animal welfare, animal health, and more recently now we're moving into sustainability. We offer a number of products that focus on improving productivity and thereby reducing emissions intensity. And just a quick plug there, right? If we were to look at the global beef, and let's say that went to a 60% vaccination rate, that alone as a mitigation or as a technology would increase our productivity by 50%. So there's tools in the toolbox today that doesn't matter what size of operation that you are or where you're at, that can help improve the greenhouse gas footprint of our farms globally. But more importantly, what I talked about is really what's happening from a methane mitigation standpoint in feed additives in the U.S. We're really excited, and we've been able to partner with DSM on launching Bovaer in the U.S. dairy market, and recently received approval for that in late May of this year, and now been working on state registrations to bring that to market. And what we're excited about is we're not just bringing an innovation that helps producers mitigate methane, but bringing it in an ecosystem along with it that allows them to implement an intervention, measure it, and then more importantly for them, monetize it. We think the farmer and making sure that farmer profitability is at the center of all of this, and how we ensure that they're able to remain profitable as we implement these technologies is really important. So what is Bovaer? Bovaer is a feed ingredient that you feed daily to cows. It's about a tablespoon of it per day, and what it does is it reduces methane emissions in that cow by about 30%. So in a U.S. lactating dairy cow, it's about 1.2 metric tons of CO2 emissions equivalent per year that we're able to mitigate by implementing Bovaer. It's a great tool. It's approved in over 60 countries. As I mentioned, we have the partnership with DSM, so there's other countries outside of the U.S., Canada, and Mexico where we have the rights to commercialize. But when you look at it, it's really agnostic to the size of the producer. It's a feed ingredient. Most people are feeding their animals in some way, shape, or form every day. It doesn't require capital. It's not a digester, right? It doesn't have a massive multi-million-dollar price tag associated to it. And it's something that, as you look at it, there's over 70 peer-reviewed studies globally that really show the science that it works. And there's a lot of food companies and other organizations that are standing behind Bovaer as a technology that is an opportunity for us to actually have a really big impact in the U.S. dairy industry. So that's one component of it. As I mentioned, we also bring tools to measure and monetize it. So not only are we bringing the innovation to the market to hopefully customers like Marilyn on her farm, but also we have tools called Uplook, which is a greenhouse gas calculator where we take the on-farm data that they're already collecting and work with the producers to understand, okay, how many cows are they feeding? What dose did they feed it at? What is in their ration? That's one of the important components of understanding what the emissions reduction are, and getting an accurate reduction by month of what they're actually doing. And so once we have that data, we send it to a carbon marketplace. So in the U.S., there is a new carbon insetting marketplace called Athian that's been created in the past 2 years. And what they're doing is working with farmers and connecting them to the food companies. So they aggregate multiple farmers, Maryland, others, Troy, if you had dairy cattle as an example, that are in that milk shed, aggregate all of their different carbon credits. And then they also verify. So they work with third-party verification and go back in every month and verify that Bovaer was actually fed to those animals and that the data we're collecting is accurate, creating a really credible and transparent credit that can then be sold to those food companies. So then Athian connects it to the food company, sells them, 10,000 metric tons of carbon reduction that month, and then that check is cut back to the producer. The other part that I would say is we've been looking at it from a U.S. perspective and been very fortunate and had really great partners with the USDA, is the private-public partnership. So I talked to you a little bit about the private partnership with the food companies of purchasing insetting carbon credits from producers. But we've also been fortunate that the USDA, through the Inflation Reduction Act, has provided more than $200 million in funding for our U.S. farmers to feed additives like Bovaer and other technologies that mitigate methane. So as part of the check that the producer receives, they'll get about 50% of it from the food company, and 50% of it is coming through the USDA dollars that the lead partners, which typically in our cases are the processors, are partnering with to make sure that goes back to the producer. And like I mentioned before, so right, we have the innovation, we have the measurement, that's the monetization. Is the way that we look at it is we want to make sure that the producer is getting an incentive for doing that. And so at the end of the day, there is an opportunity for them to make some money and have a new income stream around metric tons of carbon. So they sell their milk on one stream, and then they're selling their carbon on another stream and adding another opportunity to bring revenue. So we're really excited to say, hey, it's not just a theory, it's something that's happening. We've actually sold carbon credits already in the U.S. We're working on getting and scaling up commercially Bovaer actually this month, and hope to have some pretty big announcements here in the next couple of months around selling the first carbon credits getting the first 100,000 cows on. And really our ambition as an organization and working with the U.S. dairy industry is what we call 5 by 5 by 5. So in the next 5 years, how do we get 5 million cows annually, reducing at least 5 million metric tons of CO2 emissions every year? So we believe it's absolutely doable, and the time is to start now.
Thank you very much, Katie. Finally, for this part of the program, we have Lloyd Day again, speaking on programs, platforms, and policy innovations.
Well, that's what it says I'm going to talk about. I may talk about something else. It's the end of the day. I'm obviously not Dr. Muhammad Ibrahim. He had to run to another event, and so I'm not nearly as smart as he is when it comes to livestock, but I will mention that he is a champion and he's a world-renowned scientist on tropical livestock and on silvopastoral livestock. And just listening to the three people before me, Troy, to have a geneticist with us who's working on the genetics of cattle, that's a key component of finding ways of where human beings through science and intentional intervention can help an animal be better and hopefully produce less methane as well as good quality meat. Marilyn and your husband are deploying tools like anaerobic digesters. Nick is going to hate me because I'm going to bring up the example of California again, but there's a policy example where the state has taken a decision to reduce methane by 40%. They're incentivizing and giving funds to dairy farmers so that they can reduce their methane emissions by 40%. They're doing it. They're driving fleets of trucks on methane. They're doing a lot of wonderful things, just like you are, by taking advantage of agriculture as part of the solution. And then, Katie, I'd love to hear you talk. I love the story of Bovera. I love the story of the whole integrated system that you're doing, 5 by 5 by 5. I'm going to remember that. And I think it's terrific stuff. I've been following Bovera and what it could potentially do as a real game changer for methane emission. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is taking methane out of the environment while still producing nutrition for human beings. The demand for animal protein is going to increase. We know that. But how can we do it in a way that doesn't impact our environment in a negative way? And you guys are all doing that. And so I applaud all of you for what you're doing. At ECA, we work on the policy level, but we also work on the project level. We work with the CGIAR system. We're honored to have with us Dr. Juan Lucas Restrepo here in the front row, the Director General of CIAT Biodiversity, and all the important work that's being done by scientists at the University of Tennessee, across Penn State. Probably you're in Maryland, Pennsylvania, so Penn State's doing important work. So the university system across the Americas and across the world works together through a network of scientists and academics so that we can work with each other in order to have a platform where we can talk about livestock. We're working with governments on their NAMAs on livestock. We have a huge project in Mexico. We have a project in El Salvador. We're working with the Southern Cone, where we set up a platform on livestock with the IDB, in which we are taking data, and we're working with all the researchers and the professionals in the area, about 200 in all the Mercosur, in order to figure out what are the best practices, the management practices, the data, in order to ensure that we all work together on how do we have more sustainable livestock in this huge livestock production area, and then how do we take the lessons learned there and move it all the way up through the Americas. Now there's different systems of production. We'll have to change that as we go farther north, but this can certainly be an area where we can work with ILRI, Todd, in figuring out how to get lessons learned and have a bridge to our colleagues in other parts of the world. The Methane Hub is something that was created maybe at a COP not so long ago. We're working with them on dairy cattle in South America. In Chile, we're working on best practices. And so there's a number of things we're doing in each of the 34 offices, working with international partners like CIAT, like ILRI, like universities, in order to figure out ways in which we can help share that knowledge with the rest of the hemisphere in order to both support the livestock industry as well as to help provide a certainty for the nutrition that livestock provides. So with that, I'll stop.
Thank you very much for the rich information from the panel. We have a few minutes for some Q&A. with this panel before we switch to the second part of the program. So any questions for elaboration or clarification?
Thank you very much. My question is to Katie Cook. What's the incentive for the companies that buy carbon from the farmers?
That's a really good question. So when we think about, forgot about the echo. So when we think about what is in it for the food companies, right, is you look at most of the, if I use the Fortune 500 companies, right, 2/3 of them have made scope 3 commitments around sustainability targets. So some of them have made it by 2025, some have made it 2030, some a bit later, but they have made these commitments to their investor communities and or in some of their countries, depending on where they're located. There is certain ramifications, whether that be from a different regulations or even just their consumer goodwill that they're doing. So what you're seeing is for those food companies is it allows them farm gate access essentially to be able to implement these projects and really scale them. What we see when we talk with these food companies today is there's a lot of small projects, right? They have 3 farms here and 2 farms here. With technologies like Bovaer and others that you can really scale, you're able to get more of an industry-wide adoption that allows them to achieve their climate reduction goals much easier and have and achieve their scope 3 emissions targets.
This is for really anybody, maybe either Troy or Katie, or maybe even Todd. If I'm a smallholder farmer, let's say in Colombia, for example, I may not have 1,000 head of cattle, but what's in it for me? Let's say I've got 50 head of cattle. What's the incentive for me to use a methane inhibitor? Is there a way to purchase that in combination with regular feed that has nutrition in it that would make it just a one-stop shop buy? So I wouldn't have to buy it separately. If I don't have a lot of money, I don't have a lot of cattle, but is there a way that you could combine it with a nutrient additive so it makes sense to have both together combined instead of an additional purchase that I would have to do as a smaller scale farmer that doesn't have a lot of money? Or is that down the road further?
I think that's for Katie.
I could take a shot and try if you want to add. So I think the important thing to think about from a feed ingredient standpoint is typically, even in the U.S., right, where you have these large-scale farms, I wouldn't say very few, not many are mixing it on farm. Actually, what we see is most of our producers are getting it within their normal feed that they get delivered on farm. So it's typically coming in a premix mix that they're mixing, if they're getting that, or coming back in a complete feed. So I actually think from a small, which is what makes it very easily implementable, is we actually partner with the feed mills or the feed companies that are mixing the feed and whatever type that they may be mixing it in, and making sure that they have the balanced rations and that Bovaer, or there's other products like Rumensin that are included in their feed just like they normally would, and when it shows up, it shows up. It's not something extra that the producer has to do on the farm.
Okay, thanks, Katie. We had another question back here.
Thank you, Bola Adeshogun, Associate VP, University of Florida. My question is also to Katie. So the previous question was for a producer with 50 cows. I want to dial down to a producer with 2, okay, maybe in Rwanda or in rural Nigeria. In those cases, they're not often buying the premixes. So what products do you have that will work for those smallholders? And, feed products, health products, what do you have that will work for them? And then secondly, you also referenced measuring methane. So what do you have that would work for measuring methane on those smallholder farms? Thank you.
Whoever's going to take the next question, it has to be for someone other than Katie.
No, that's a really good question. So when we think about those smaller farmers, right, it's really more probably on the animal health side of the different things. Most of them are likely not vaccinating, using dewormers, using other production tools that may be available. I think those are the opportunities that are really in the very near future that I would say are there for them, that not just give them the ability to reduce their carbon footprint, but also improve the health of the animal, right? So it's helping mitigate disease, prevent injury, all of those other pieces. And that's where I think from a small farmer, that's the near-term opportunity. But as you think about longer term, there's certainly projects that are in not just the Elanco pipeline, but as you look at around innovations in this space, where there's bolus technology, there's other, I would say, mechanical type technology where they actually are focusing on smaller farmers and how do they actually help, the guy that has 1, 2, 3 head be able to actually implement that. So that's the first component is near-term animal health products. Mid-term, I think in the next 5 years, you'll see solutions, whether that's boluses or other technologies that allow them to do it when they're not getting continuously fed every day. And then the measurement piece. So I'd be honest with you, I think measurement is the hardest part in this whole equation, not necessarily the technology. The technology exists. It's how do you get the data? So right now, we're talking about bigger systems that are collecting data. What we're working on, and it's a problem even in the U.S. on cow-calf operations where the average herd size is less than 40 head, right? So those guys aren't as sophisticated either, is looking at how can you get mobile technology that you're putting into a cell phone maybe and having just some very simple data inputs that you're putting into and actually using the science generated by universities and other organizations to essentially model and predict what that technology would be and be more of an intervention-based protocol. So if you implement a vaccine and it improves your productivity by 50%, they would say, I did it to 2 cows, there would be a calculation based on the national standards, and it would be a 50% reduction. What I would say there, it's not perfect, but let's do progress over perfection, and if that's the best data that we have, let's get them started on it. As they get used to inputting data, we can continue to ask and collect more. As they get more infrastructure, right, to actually have, the internet's going to be a problem and connectivity is an issue. So finding different solutions and how do we help them connect, maybe not daily, but is it weekly, or is there a way that they're collecting that data within their community? I think those are all questions that people are actually working on. I know a number of small tech companies that are looking at some opportunities to help provide for those smaller farmers.
Thanks. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more before we move on. Is this going to be for Katie again? Okay.
Thanks. Question for Troy. So what are the gains we can get from genetics, like in terms of emissions? You mentioned that there's a lot of variability. And is it the genetics of the cattle themselves, or is it also the genetics of the microbiome? And how can we get an EPD if it's the microbiome?
What's an EPD?
Estimated progeny difference, right?
Yeah, so those are the million-dollar questions, right? I think there's still some question. We've estimated the heritable nature of these traits, right? So we can guess that. How much genetic diversity exists within the population on which to select is the different piece. I've heard numbers of something along the lines of 30% over the course of 5 generations or something along those lines, right? The key part of this is that we try and avoid at all costs to do single trait selection. We can back ourselves into a corner if we select, particularly on yield. Our dairy friends know well what can happen to traits like fertility when you select for milk yield nonstop. And I think we want to be really cautious with methane as a trait. Once we develop a tool that allows producers to select for it, we've got to be able to integrate it into an index, into a breeding objective that balances all those other aspects of profitability, right? So we can't let carcass weight, our end product, suffer. We also can't let feed efficiency suffer. It's got to be an optimum, and all of those things require economic values. And so I think there's still a lot of question, particularly in the cow-calf world, right? Commercial grazing beef cattle. What's the value of a unit of carbon saved? Because that's going to be really integral to fitting this into a breeding objective. The second piece is it's not actually the cow that's making the methane, right? It's the microorganisms that colonize a rumen. And that's a big part of the research that our lab does, is trying to understand that interface between the cow and the microbes that her rumen is going to support. And so what it looks like is there's a core set of those microbes, many of which are methanogenic, so those are the ones responsible for producing methane, that are actually heritable, right? So even though that calf starts fresh, the environment that it cultures from its genetic predispositions are going to actually be responsible for a set of those microbes, particularly sets of those methanogens that sort of get passed on in a heritable nature. So really what we would be selecting on for a methane-based EPD or EBV or PTA if you're a dairy breeder is really probably for animals whose ruminal environment supports lower populations of methanogens. So it's long and circuitous, and we're just scratching the surface. Still a lot of really basic work on that, understanding how those microbes interface with the host animal itself. But lots of work to do. Hopefully, lots of money to be invested in that area. But still, I think it's important. Whether it's in in North and South America, it's in the global South, that our best path towards immediate reductions is through increased productivity, right? An open cow has a terrible methane hoof print, right? And so we've got tools on the ground right now that allow us to make progress, but that doesn't absolve us from developing direct solutions for methane in the process. So it takes everything, and I think that our challenges in the Americas very similar to what we're dealing with in the global South on that front. Yeah.
If I could just add a little bit to that, when I look at this on our dairy farm, our cows in the past couple of years have been milking more. Their butter fat, 2 years ago, their butter fat went to 4%. We milk Holsteins, okay? It's unheard of. And yet it was happening time and again in our area. And what it came down to, the theme with all the dairy farmers, was the corn seed that they planted. So when you look at how far our corn seed has come from 5 years ago, from 10 years ago, what's the next 5 years going to be like? It's going to just continue to be more efficient and give us better components and more efficiencies for animals. It used to be if a cow milked 100 pounds a day, she didn't last more than a lactation or two. Now the longevity of that dairy cow is years and years and years, and yet she's the milk production is just incredible. So I think we have a lot of potential to continue, and I think it's going to be technology that's available and scalable to any farmer across the globe.
Okay, thank you very much. In the interest of time, I think we need to move on to the next segment of the panel, but please a round of applause for our first half of the panel. We're switching now from the Americas context to an African context. Still speaking on the topic of livestock and emissions. We will have another panel of 4 speakers speaking on driving investment toward livestock and climate solutions and innovations in action. This is, first we're going to have Dr. Apollinaire Jacquin, the Director General of the International Livestock Research Institute, who will be outlining an upcoming initiative on Livestock and Climate Solutions Hub, something we're starting at ILRI and in the CG. And then we'll have comments from Bernard Kimoro, the head of climate change and livestock at the State Department of Livestock in the Kenyan Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock. Joining us again virtually will be Mary Mbole Kariuki, who's the lead of technology, innovation, and skills development at the African Union Inter-African Bureau on Animal Resources. And finally, Dr. Biola Karim Badmos, Senior Agricultural and Food Security Specialist at the Islamic Development Bank. So at that, Apollinaire, the floor is yours. We will bring up slide as and when.
Thank you, Todd. Greetings, colleagues. I hope you can hear me. I'm calling in from the International Livestock Research Institute and specifically from Nairobi, Kenya. Please accept my apologies for not being with you in the room, but I want to acknowledge the presence of distinguished colleagues who are really making this connection relatively easily. So ICAR, thank you so much for acknowledging our partnership, and thank you for being the big brother. You know, you were set up in 1942, that 82 years old, and this year we'll be celebrating our 50th anniversary, which is, I think, collaborating with you has been very meaningful for us to grow up to this point. Let me also acknowledge my colleague, Juanluca Restrepo, the Director General of the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, who is in the room there. Juanluca, this is our story. Thank you for being there to supplement something that I may have missed. In acknowledging the collaboration, let me also call on Troy, who was in the previous panel. Thank you for laying a great foundation to demonstrate how genetic improvement can help, address some of these issues. And Prof. Bola from the University of Florida, thank you for your intervention. You help us to create a contrast between what's happening in the global north versus the global south. At the onset, I would like to say that really the possibilities that we have seen through the first panel are really at the center of what we're going to discuss. If we can make some of those changes in the global north, how can we enable such advances in the global south? And really referring to what Bola mentioned, we're looking at farmers with 2-3 animals. How can we deliver some of these interventions to them? On this, I also want to mention that for us in the global south, we're looking at 3 different production systems: the pastoral systems, the semi-intensive system or intensive system, similar to what you see in the global north, and also the mixed crop livestock system. These are very different, the whole different potential, but the solutions that we want to bring to those systems are very different. And I think that's one of the things that I would like us to look into. And that really has been at the center of really cracking this question here. What we are trying to do today is really to demonstrate that some of the advances that we have made globally on genetics, animal health, and nutrition, and all other interventions really can help us really formulate solutions that are really integrated to support livestock farmers in this part of the world. Let me say that there is a sense of urgency. How can we support smallholder farmers? And I think building on the work that I'll talk a little bit about later on, we're proposing that really we are at the crossroad. I really don't want to, say some of the things that are related to the challenges of livestock, but just to say that as an international, the International Livestock Research Institute, building on what we've done with the Alliance, our partners, I'm really pleased to see Bernard, the colleague from Kenya. We've enjoyed that partnership. So we're at the point where we really want to look at things differently. We want to integrate solutions. We want really not just to charge in one direction, but really integrate genetic improvement, nutrition, animal health, and really look at the political economy and see how we can support small-scale producers. The hub that we are very pleased to launch today is really about addressing the balancing of the raising demand for animal source with environmental sustainability, but also to drive improvement of the livelihoods. I think that's really what I want you to look at. So if you could help me get the first slide, Todd. So is a slide before this one, please. It's really what we call the Livestock and Climate Solution Hub, essentially ensuring that we help farmers, harness what has been discussed in the first part of this session. The vision is really about transformation of livestock-based system in low and middle income country, really transitioning to low emission, healthy, resilient, and profitable food system by 2040. And I think it's really important for us to look at, making reference to what Todd has mentioned. It's about productivity, but we call it productivity plus plus. We cannot just charge in one direction, look at milk production. We have to be looking at some of the other traits that are really important for us. So what's the size of the ambition? The ambition is really to serve as a global platform to accelerate scientific breakthroughs and scalable solutions in the livestock sector. The hub will focus on bringing expertise across animal health, genetics, nutrition, environment, political economy, and policies to deliver integrated and transformative solutions. And it will also be a an opportunity to provide converging solutions. And we would like to see that across 4 different pillars. One pillar is really about innovation for climate smart livestock, essentially talking about how you can select, how can you use BOVA, how can you also use other nutritional interventions, how can you provide animal health intervention to reduce emission. The second pillar of the hub is going to be about partnership for deployment and scaling. It's one thing to have a solution that has impact on 1,000 farmers, but it's another challenge to take that to millions, 10 millions and 100 million farmers. I think that's really what we are trying to do in pillar 2 of the hub. The third pillar of the hub is going to be about multi-stakeholders platforms. We are on this session here, not just the genetics, not just animal health, and I think there are others in policy and also politics in ensuring that really science is within an environment where the evidence that we generate can end up at the table of the policymaker to drive solutions and in decisions that have to be made at the country or regional level. And finally, sticking about policy is really going to be for us to use evidence to drive the policies that will be made in the livestock sector. So what's the foundation on which we are proposing this hub? We're proposing this hub based on, big history that we have in doing this within the CGIAR and a range of partners. We have some of the projects that I really want to single out to demonstrate how it is possible. On this, I want to acknowledge the partnership that we have between ILRI, the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, and ICADA and some of our national programs to demonstrate that we can screen for forage accession that have the potential to reduce emission. Imagine a situation where we can advise a farmer in the western part of Nigeria, in the northern part of Kenya, that these are the feed resources that you have available for your production system. But more importantly, going beyond being of nutritional values, they can help you to reduce emission. I think that's really what we are trying to do in this project funded by the Bezos Earth Fund. We also have another project called Environ Cow, which is really identifying and breeding for low emission, high performance dairy cow through farm level data collection and data utilization. Troy talked about we don't want to charge single lane selecting for just one trait. And I think this is an opportunity for us to maximize on the diversity that we continue to have in this part of the world, but more importantly, build what I want to use his reference of selection index to ensure that we can have highly producing animals, disease resilient, low emitting, better feed converters, and with longevity and many more. So that's really a project through which we have demonstrated that it's actually possible to create incentive for farmers with only 2-3 animals to be releasing data, to be reporting some of their performance to you so that you can use that to support them, do a better job. And finally, we are also, the foundation onto which we're making this proposal is really on our ability to do digital health recording, using data to support better breeding and livestock management. We really want to move the needle to a point where we can support the farmers to identify the best animal that fits in the system, the best animal that consider all other external shocks that are present in the system, but overall the best animal that will be profitable to the smallholder farmers. So I think through this, I have demonstrated to you that our call to action is really around integrating solutions, but ensuring that this is about evidence that we can generate, working as a partnership along the lines from discovery to application on the ground, and ensuring that we really customize and deliver solutions that consider the differences of the production systems. Finally, let me also mention, building on the story of genetic diversity that we continue to have in the global south, that this is the moment for us to use some of these technologies and innovation to identify some of the best breeds that are not only fit for the systems here, but really globally can help us to move the needle in terms of reducing emission, overall transitioning to climate smart livestock systems. So let me leave it here, and that's the call for action. And I hope there will be another opportunity for us, through this panel to say a little bit more. Back to you, Todd, and thank you for earlier panelists for really creating a strong foundation for me to make this call of action. And us, as the International Livestock Research Institute, part of the CGIAR family, we're ready to work with partners on the Livestock and Climate Solution Hub that we're very proud to announce today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Apollinaire. I hope you can hear the applause from the audience. So
Thank
yes,
you.
I'm very happy that you ended on the topic of partnerships, because this is a very new announcement. This is a work in progress at ILRI. And we would like, as a follow-up to this announcement and the outline of the the Livestock and Climate Solutions Hub, we would like to get input from partners, starting with Bernard Kimoro from the Kenyan Department of Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Todd. Thank you, Apollinaire, for the introduction. First, I want to say I've worked with ILRI until people think I'm part of their staff. But it's always a pleasure, to work with the ILRI and bring solutions, especially to the smallholders. Kenya is a very unique country. One, we appreciate the fact that ILRI it's based in Nairobi. Of course, also CGIAR biodiversity also in Nairobi as well. And that brings to us a certain advantage. I've listened to the first panel and what they talked about. Everything is about research, and then you develop and you go and implement. For us in Kenya, one of the things that we really have identified is that we have challenges in several aspects related to the livestock industry. One is on the issue of the feeds. Of course, there is the issue again of genetics, and then finally on the animal health aspects. And we are lucky that we have ILRI that is helping us. On the issue of the feeds, just to bring the context, we've just done what we call a national feed balance. And what we found out is we have a deficit of 60 million kilograms of dry matter. That is dry matter, all right? When you look at it in terms of now the specific nutrients, protein is even worse. Yeah, so I'm talking about generally in terms of dry matter. If you look at the specific nutrients, if you talk about energy, maybe protein is even worse. We are way far off. So, and if you look at the structure or the ecological system in Kenya, 70% of the country, I've just been from another panel, and some of you may have heard this, of our livestock is in the arid and semi-arid lands of Kenya, which is about 86% of the country. So only about 16%, or 14 to 16, we say 14 to 16% is in the high and medium potential areas, where there is a mixed farming, smallholder dairy systems. Now, the reason why I say all this is because where you have 70% of our population occupying 16% of the land, you can imagine the kind of population we have there. In terms of all the dairy animals we have in Kenya, 5 million are only in the 16% of the country, which is a very small area. So there are challenges in terms of how do we increase productivity in those areas. Yeah, our average daily, if I can put it, annual lactation per animal is about 2,000 kilograms, which is obviously very low. So there are gaps there that need to be filled. And in terms of the research, look at what ILRI has been able to do from way back. If you look at the fodder that we're using in the smallholder farming systems, the development of the fodder, whether it is Napier grass or other kinds of grasses, have originated partly from the work that ILRI is doing. And this is one of the things that actually has meant Kenya to transition to a much more higher level of production compared to the peers in the region. Yeah, if you look at the ASAL areas, there's work going on about selection of the different forage species using very, very innovative technologies like genomic selection of some of those forages. And this is helping us to accelerate the identification of the forage resources that we can actually be able to use, because climate change is actually becoming a problem, and you're not able to have some of these materials produced fast enough, or even adaptable kind of forage species being generated. So that's one area I think ILRI has been very important to us, and we have been able to move very fast on the issues of the feeds. Now, on the issues of the breeding, I know there's a lot that ILRI is doing, but it has not been blowing its trumpet. There's work they're doing around working with the smallholder farmers, identifying a program where they use even digital solution, the iCow, to talk about how to improve the animals. Yeah, they even have living labs, for example, where they are also informing farmers on how to be able to undertake some of the research within the farms, and also to provide like centers of excellence that can be used to support the other farmers. So that's another area. So animal health, I think they also have a very big One Health program that we have really benefited. Now, that is one area. There's one area also that helps us to identify. I think methane and issues around greenhouse gases in livestock are very, very important to us. And we have been talking about it as well in other forums. The data that is being generated by ILRI and the CG centers has been instrumental in helping us to transition from the tier 1 of our emission inventory to tier 2. For example, we started going into tier 1 for dairy in 2016. But last year, we decided that we want now to look at all the key livestock categories and go into tier 2. And there's a reason for that. So when we look at the data that we used for tier 2 for non-dairy ruminants, which means non-dairy cattle, sheep and goats, and the camels, this is data that we're able to get from ILRI. And we are working collaboratively through what we are calling a core team, where ILRI is part and parcel of the work that we do in Kenya. So for us as policy, our link with the research organization, especially ILRI and the CG centers, has been very instrumental in advancing our capability of being able to track the emissions, because that is the only way you can be able, from a policy perspective, to identify the levers where you can actually be able to reduce the emissions. If you're talking about tier 1, you're only talking about reducing emissions through reduction of livestock numbers. But tier 2 will help us to identify the breeding issues that have been talked about, the animal nutrition issues, and also the animal health, which we are also trying to work and see how best you can be able to get the data to support that. So, I mean, there's a lot that we are doing. Research is critical. We need a lot of data from the research, and more importantly, to work on a continuous basis to be able to support the mitigation potential that we have in Kenya, and also to be able to use it as an opportunity to let our farmers also benefit from some of the carbon projects that we are seeing coming into the country. So briefly, maybe that's what I can say for now. Maybe additional questions later.
Thank you very much, Bernard. I would now like to introduce Dr. Mary Mbole Kariuki, who's joining us from the African Union Inter-African Bureau for Animal Resources. Mary, could you please elaborate, what do you find interesting or exciting about this Livestock and Climate Solutions Hub? And maybe what advice do you have for us as we develop this in the interest of the AUI by our partner countries?
Thank you so much, Todd, and good day. I hope you can hear me. Yes? Okay, thank you so much. So good afternoon and good morning, wherever you are. And thank you so much for having me today in this very important panel session. So I think what has really caught my eye today is what is right behind you, Todd, leaving no one behind. That really speaks volumes for us as the African Union. And I think it's one of the critical things that this program and this hub really speaks to, because already Africa has put into place various structures. One of the key things that I'd like to highlight is, of course, what has already been developed, the African Union Climate Change and Resilient Development Strategy for 2022 to 2032. And it clearly highlights exactly what has just been amplified by the audience. One of the key things is governance. The second axis is actions on adaptation pathways. The third one is really on trying to enhancing means for mechanisms. And the very fourth one is leveraging on regional flagship initiatives. Now, from what we have just discussed, it's very important for us to align, to walk step by step with already what is existing in the African context, considering that 18 out of the 20 most countries that will be affected by climate change and, of course, be rendered without food security are African countries. So one of the key things I'd like to emphasize on is number one, is the action on access to renewable energy. And I think this is something that needs to be reiterated over and over. We need to be able to drive agendas that will drive these actions that are needed by the African member states. One of the challenges that we have observed is, as researchers continue to do research, the technologies, the innovations, what is needed to drive renewable energy is really remaining at the research desk. So there needs to be very strong intervention, and I hope that the Climate Hub will be the intervention that we so seek to bring these technologies, to bring these innovations that will be used to improve and adapt and mitigate against climate change in terms of renewable energy. Another issue that came up is the climate information services, and I think Apollonia talked about the data actions. And Africa has really been driving this very, very strong. We have the Climate Dev Africa that has been talking about observational infrastructure. We also have the early warning systems that are already in place in African institutions. We have the continental one. We have the one that is based in Niamey. We have the one that is based in Addis Ababa. We have the regional early warning systems, again, that we have in SADC, ECOWAS, ECAS, and all these need to speak to what we are talking about. So if we're setting up this innovation hub or this climate hub, then they all need to be aligned. They need to be already leveraging on regional flagship initiatives that have already been endorsed by the heads of state. So it becomes more of not a duplication, but rather a coordinated effort that we are moving forward in a very harmonious manner. Again, we've looked at issues in terms of climate change and risk insurance. I've had a lot of, I think Kimura has talked about us, the lack of feed, the issues that are pending. You know, this really has great impact on our livestock populations. And I think we need to put into place structures that are going to support climate risk insurance. And these already have been put in place. Now, I'd like to emphasize on one of the key things on building on climate change. Capacity building. Capacity building is one of the key things that is needed by the African Union. We need to step into place where we have climate research for development for Africa in tune with what the scientists are doing. So really having a situation where you put the cart before the donkey, but the donkey should be before the cart. So we need to work hand in hand to ask ourselves, what do the African countries need? Is this in alignment to the strategy and action plan that has been very well spelled out in terms of the needs of the African continent, in terms of what they require us to do, and in alignment to the policy and governance structures? I've had a lot of talk of the technologies and innovations, and it is my hope that we're going to open a way in such a way that African countries are going to access these technologies after this COP, they're going to be able to reach out to these technologies and utilize them in the best way possible. Before I conclude, I want to just highlight on 3 main points that really we need to work together in terms of these actions. 1, inclusion. We need to ensure that if we are going to drive anything appertaining climate issues and emissions, we have to have inclusion of all stakeholders. 2, alignment to already existing African Union strategies. We already have a plan. We have the African Union Green Recovery Action Plan that talks about green cities, that talks about climate finance, that talks about resilient agriculture. All these things have already been documented and structured. What they need is the implementation based on the understanding of the scientific actions that are there. We've talked of genetics. What are we saying about genetics? We can ask ourselves in this place, if you present a very good and efficient animal, we want to reduce the herd size to a pastoral community. Think about the socio-economic impact. Pastoralists believe in large herd sizes. They don't understand the concept at all. And reducing that population size will result to some cultural issues. So these actions in terms of science need to work hand in hand with the cultural impact of the stakeholders, because they are the end users of what we are going to be receiving. Cooperation. I think Apollonia talked about it. All of us sitting at the table and working hand in hand with actions that will bring relevant feedback to the countries and to the member states. I look at this action as a 3-legged stool, the African 3-legged stool. 1, the scientist at the table. 2, the policymaker. And 3, the livestock keepers. If any part of this stool is not even, then nobody will use this tool. So I believe this is a challenge for all of us to really align to things that will really keep the stool stable to ensure that we have forward actions. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Mary. Again, lots of applause in the room, and I love the 3-legged stool analogy. It's a great way to visualize this. And finally, Biola from the Islamic Development Bank. From your institution's perspective, what do you find exciting or relevant in this? How would you prioritize elements of it? And what advice do you have for us as we move forward?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Todd. And thank you for inviting us to this session. Very interesting session. Very interesting in the sense that in Islamic Development Bank, we are also preparing the Regional African Livestock Resilience Program, so which is coming up at a good time when Israel is also preparing the climate up. Just to give you a quick overview of our livestock resilience program, the idea is to, it's addressing basically what the Hillary Climate Hub is also addressing. We want to create improve livelihood of the farmers, and we also want to address climate change. We want to create employment. So which I can also see I connected it with the adaptation, mitigation, and also resilience from the hub. So basically, our support in the livestock resilience program is across the value chain, from production to processing. Upstream to the downstream segment of the value chain. So we'll be supporting input provision to improve, feeds and the likes. Also processing, when this production have been made, improvement in yield, we need to process it because we need to add value to these items, to also, because we are talking of livelihood improvement. By processing, through value addition, farmers can earn more. And also the market side, they need to have market to get their product to. So we are looking at supporting roads and also the market. So going back to the hub, actually I went through it. Like I said, it's very interesting. But also I have some comments that I would like to also throw into the to it. So it looks like we're putting everything on climate change. The way I perceive it. Yes, climate change is cut across everything, but I believe, and I'm from Nigeria, and I know the reality. Aside climate change, our farmers are also they also lack input. They lack other items. Technology is also lacking. So I was looking at if we can. I mean, it's there. You are going to address resilience. Resilience is quite large. Resilience is about supporting them with other things they need to build their system. So if we can actually also highlight that in addition to climate change, the hub is also going to, I mean, make it bold in the proposal that it's not only about climate change. There are other issues beyond climate change that the hub will also be addressing. I think that would be good. You know, we are financiers, and we like to see numbers. So I think it will also be good if we can if we can quantify the what exactly is our livestock yield at the current moment. For instance, you know, the yield, the research shows that the yield gap in Africa is about between 28% to almost 170%. I think we need to show some of these numbers so that we can see the magnitude. I mean, we know it, but we want to convince some of our leaders. So generally, it's very relevant. I mean, looking at it from the relevance perspective, livestock contribute to climate. Climate also impact livestock, so it's very relevant. So one other item that I think I didn't see clearly is let me just mention this. The private sector element, I think it also needs to come out very clearly, because we finance projects in the Islamic Development Bank. We support member countries with financing. But what we realize is at the point of when projects are being closing, at the closing stage, sometimes the project does close like that. So we need some people to take it after the project is completed. And usually the private sector are usually the best to do it. I mean, the farmers are basically private sector. So we need to build their capacity to build them to the level where they can actually continue with this innovation. So if there's a way we can strengthen the private sector element in the proposal, that would be great. Then what I also realized I could see a lot of opportunities. I mean, the collaboration, the tapping on technology. So what I would also like to see is ILRI has done a lot of work. I mean, I could see a list of great work done. I also would like to see the linkage with already the work done by ILRI. It's there, but we want to link it to show that it's not something new. It's just a continuation of the great work that ILRI has been doing. So that linkage, it would be great to show it. And finally, like I said, we are a financing institution. We need to also come up with, ILRI is doing this already. ILRI has done this for us in the Gambia and Guinea, a livestock master plan. I think we may also want to show how this hub will come with generation of master plan for livestock development that the countries can actually use to request for financing. Because in the end, we need to scale it up. We don't want to keep it at just research based. So maybe element of master plan development or element of investment plan that the hub will generate for the countries that probably are interested. And based on the master plan, the country can submit requests to us, World Bank, African Development Bank, or other financiers that we already have a master plan for livestock development in the country. We need you to support our country. Then it will be straight up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Biola, and thanks to all the panel for these insightful and constructive comments. I would like to open the floor now for questions from the audience. These can be for Apollinaire, or they can be responses to the panelists as well. Any takers?
Yeah, I think I really enjoyed Mary's three-legged stool comment. I think that's so important. But the thing that I think about is I've been around a lot of policymakers, and I live with a bunch of scientists, and I know a lot of farmers. those three people often can't talk to each other. So can each of you speak a little bit to the importance of an extension service, a go-between between each of those and their role, not just in the Climate Hub, but in African agriculture in general, and how they can be good partners at making sure that this work moves forward from the lab and into farmers practically, from finance to implementation on farm.
Okay, Apollinaire, would you like to take an initial go at that?
Yeah, I could do that. So thank you, Roy. It's really around creating incentive. I think I want to also use that to address the question, the challenge from a colleague from the Islamic Development Bank. It's climate which is central to this, but it's really about incentives. How do you bring the private sector? How do you ensure that this extension, what are the tools that the extension service is delivering to farmers? The bottom line to the farmer is really making money. Do they have access to the right breed? Can they generate enough milk? Can they make the bottom line? So it's really about incentive. Let me just leave it at that. We can take more time to elaborate further.
Let Bernard take a go.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, first, I want to clarify that Kenya is doing a master plan, and one of the biggest data sources that we're using is the data that we're getting from ILRI. So I look at it, and I heard about Nigeria developing also. I think they already have Gambia. I know Nigeria for sure because I was with them at some point that they are developing their master plan, and ILRI is assisting in that process. So one of the things that hampers, especially the policy-making process, is the evidence. And I can assure you, we go around looking for that evidence, and sometimes we don't get it. I think one of the things the hub will solve in this regard is that we'll have a point where we can actually have that evidence when we are making our policies, or even the master, like the development plans, livestock master plans, and all that. So we're already doing it, and the data. We say data is not there, which is not true. I honestly want to say data is there, but it's the way it is structured. Yeah, it is in so many places that it becomes unusable. Yeah, so the hub actually will help kind of solve that kind of a problem, because you can go to a one point and you get a lot of data that you use as evidence when you're developing your policies and your plans. Right now we are doing a livestock. We are just almost in the final stages of developing the livestock methane roadmap for Kenya, and I can assure you, the data that we have used mostly is coming from the research. It would have been faster if it was already available at a point, and I see this hub as a solution to some of these kind of challenges that we are getting. So from a policymaker's perspective, I think this is going to be a game changer for some of us. I agree with him that we need to have more data. I belong to a group that is called Livestock Data for Decisions. Yeah, so probably it's an issue of linking up with some of these groups where the data is, so that you can click and you're able to see the visualizations and the data which is there, that you can use it as a decision maker at different levels, whether you are a farmer, policy maker, or somebody who is doing the planning. So I think this can help us solve some of those problems.
Okay, Mary, go ahead and please comment on the question of a relationship with extension.
Yes, thank you, Troy. Thank you really for that intervention. And this is something that we've actually been having continuous discussions with ILRI. And I think it boils down to everything we are doing being people-centered. When you do research to answer a scientific-driven question, you do not reach the people. So we need to flip the way we look at things, because that is why you realize there's pushback from government, because government equals votes. So what are you putting on the table that will be translated to a happy people? So this needs to be very well articulated and crystallized. Kimoro has just talked about data. Data is critical, but we must focus on value for data. When you draw this prediction map that makes no sense to a policymaker, you continue speaking to yourselves. We speak to each other. We continue sharing this and using the p-value not significant. The policymaker wants a simple, clear, succinct intervention. What does this mean? And what intervention do you want me to make? And what are the budgetary allocations to this? It needs to be clear, stepping away from science. And I think this is a challenge that we continue to face. And that is why extension is critical. When you develop a product that cannot even be utilized by the extension, who represents government, you continue to have interventions sitting at the table. So maybe it's going to be a paradigm shift for us as researchers, as scientists. I'm now in policy, so I'm able to wear both hats. I was working with ILRI, so I know how we used to do the drill. So it's very important for us to change our paradigm shift, just to ask ourselves, what do we need to do, and have it people-centered? Will this deliver a product? When we say research, it should be research and development. And I think the hub will really give us that extension arm, and we'll work very, very closely with ILRI. AU IBA is committed to that. We are coming up with a Lives project. And one of the key things that we want to do is come up with common positions on these matters. What are the common positions that we are saying? We are everywhere, but what are really the common positions for Africa to be able to drive these things implementable based on science interventions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Keep it practical, keep it people-centered. Biolo, you want a quick comment?
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, to respond to Troy's question, how science and farmers can speak to each other. Actually, in the Islamic Development Bank, in the recent time, what we have been doing is, okay, I will give an example before I use ILRI as an example. We have a number of projects whereby we work with a number of CGIAR centers. For instance, we have a project called Soil Fertility Mapping Program. I mean, I heard about soil now. If the soil is, if it's bad, I mean, everything is bad. And I think I also read recently on the, something in the United States as well. So what we realize is that we need to build the foundation first, which is the soil. Then every other thing that comes to the soil gets better. It tells you which soil is best for which. So what we have been doing is that we're working with a CGI center, which is a CIFOR. Basically, they are championing this for us. We work with them to design projects. Then at the onset, we connect them with the country. For us, we work with the country, and the farmers are under the country. So when we have this kind of relationship at the onset, the same way we are trying to engage with ILRI for our livestock program, we embed them in our program from onset. So when they are part of the program, the ownership is there. The farmers know that this is a partner they are working with. So, and based on the technology that we have, we are able to transfer it to the farmers. And going back to what Apollinia mentioned, what is on the table for the farmer? Financing is there. We are there to finance their needs. So if you are going to put finance, they will listen to research. So, but I also support the idea of research should be for research for development, not just research for research. So I think the idea is that we are there to connect science and farmers together. Thank you.
Okay, I believe we have time for one final question for Apollinaire on the Livestock and Climate Solutions Hub, or no burning questions. I see no hands in the air. It's always challenging to try and summarize these kinds of sessions. We've had a diverse array of presentations, starting with high-intensity system from the Americas to the Livestock and Climate Solutions Hub emerging in Africa. But I think one of the threads running through all this is the importance of context-based solutions. The contexts are very different in these cases, clearly, but in each case, we're looking at some really interesting and compelling solutions to address the mitigation and adaptation priorities within the livestock sectors. I think in both cases we've seen the importance of appealing to benefits for producers themselves and for other value chain actors at the local practical level, while also keeping an eye on global mitigation targets as a necessary anchor point for any intervention in livestock systems, whether in the Americas, Africas, or elsewhere. So at that, I would like to very much thank both panels for joining us this evening, indeed. The Livestock and Climate Solutions Hub is a work in progress. This is a very initial announcement. I hope you are all going to be ready to watch this space and not just watch, but contribute to this space as we continue to develop the concept and develop the collaborations that will make it